Hello, everybody. I want to welcome you to the ySKILLS webinar. We will today deal with the topic of longitudinal data collection in schools. And it's a bit more specific. We will deal with specific challenges in longitudinal data collection in schools during the pandemic. Longitudinal data collection always comes with a lot of challenges, and but during the pandemic we had to deal with challenges and with unexpected ones additionally to the usual ones. When I say we, I'm talking about the ySKILLS project, and which is the framework in which the webinar happens. I'm happy and proud to welcome the speakers, especially to welcome Susanne Kuger, who is the external expert today, and she will talk about longitudinal data collection and why we should still, despite the challenges, why we should still, what are the benefits and why we should still have why the efforts are worth it. And she will give the first presentation. Then we have Giovanna Mascaroni from Italy. I'll give more introduction to each speaker a bit later, like just shortly before each speaker starts with his presentation or her presentation. Then there's Veronika Kalmus from Estonia, Christine Böttcher from Germany, myself guiding through the webinar, and Rasmus Mannerström from Finland. So welcome everybody. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad you're joining us here. And I will just say, I went already with you quickly through who will be speaking today. And I will come back to this. And first, I want to just say a few words about the ySKILLS, Youth Skills is the longer name, project. We are investigating digital skills and well-being of young people and how this is related. There is 15 partners from all across Europe. So more specifically, we are investigating digital skills of 12 to 17-year-old school students, pupils in Europe. And we have there's many research questions, and we have many specific smaller studies, but one important one is the most important ones, the biggest ones, is which factors influence the development of digital skills of young people, and how do digital skills influence the cognitive, physical, psychological, and social well-being of young people. Just to give you an idea of what it is all about. And we are conducting a longitudinal survey among with other methods, but this is one of our core instruments of data collection. And in 3 waves in 6 European countries. The first wave was happening this year. As I said, during the pandemic, we had some unexpected challenges. And today we will talk about these challenges, but also come up with solutions and conclusions for the waves to follow. I will go back to the overview, to the schedule of today. And as I said, our first speaker will be Susanne Kuger. She is from the German Youth Institute, and she is the head of the Department of Social Monitoring and Methodology. She is an expert in longitudinal research and quantitative methods, and she is partner in the German NEPS study. This is the National Educational Panel Survey or Study. And it's an important, large study which investigates educational trajectories, and by using large-scale longitudinal data collection, and it consists of several specific studies, which each has a different starting cohort. And starting with and one of the starting cohorts is even newborns, so it's really about the whole life course. Another starting cohort would be, I think, school students in grade 5, another one in grade 9. So and I think they probably face similar challenges than we do. For example, that school students change school and are not in the classroom to be found in the classroom anymore because for several reasons, as you know. So, and then they also have to track individually the pupils. And yeah, I think there is a lot what we can learn from the NAP study, and also from Susanne Kuger today. Yeah, I think this was more or less 5 minutes. So Susanne Kuger, please, Susanne, go ahead and start with your presentation. I will end mine here.
Thank you very much for having me here for this webinar, and thank you very much for this very nice introduction. I was asked, as you mentioned right now already, that to, well, provide a general input and overview of why we're doing longitudinal research. So I kind of changed the title of my presentation. It's just 3 slides. To benefits of longitudinal research, because I saw that in your agenda you already have some of the, well, more challenges, you called them. Nevertheless, the 3rd slide is on challenges as well, because some of them can actually be interpreted as well, benefits, or let's say at least possibilities to learn something for the research context. So some benefits of longitudinal research in 8 or 10 minutes, I'll try. The big question, actually, how can we start this? Is for me, as always, the big why. Why are we doing this? I mean, there's so many challenges. It's really difficult. We all struggle with our everyday work, particularly in times of a pandemic. So the question really is, why are we doing this? And I think just to picture the big why, or answers to the big why, is that we want to inform. We want to inform people. We want to inform, on the one hand, on the policy, the practitioners, the everyday people working, improving schools over time. So we want to deliver evidence-based policy information. And we want, on the other side, we want to reach substantial and methodological research outcomes and enhance our knowledge about the system, about students, about schools. Well, want to further our knowledge base. That is the red bubble on top. A second point that can be opened up why we're doing longitudinal research is because once you follow students, in this case, over time, is you can say something about, 1, the current state, what's happening right now at any point that you're going into the field looking at them. And the second thing is you can actually say something about their change. Both types of information are very valuable. They are particularly valuable if you have them for the same people, so you can actually see what's happening, who's doing what, who's in which position, sketching their life situations and what they learn every day. And you can follow and track them over time. By doing this, you can, on the one hand side, identify what in the psychology literature is called, or going by critical phases. So you can identify at what point in time something happens. There are important situations, there are triggering situations, for example, for a student, something that needs to be available for a student to learn something. So you can have this critical phase incident. At the same time, you can use longitudinal data if you're applying it correctly, or in the right mindset, for quasi-causal designs. So you're not only describing, not only delivering descriptive information, but you're also delivering information that, well, triggers or answers the research questions that we have in a almost causal manner. We're always trying to get at causality. So longitudinal data, this is what's at the heart of the 3, is really what's delivering information for all 3 types of questions that we have on why we're producing data. So representative longitudinal data are important in general as an overarching issue. And if you're asking why is longitudinal data particularly important in the context of digital skills and children's well-being or students' well-being, there are a lot of different theoretical frameworks that you can tap on. Here, for the moment, I brought up a bit older framework that is still applicable in this context. It's sense capability approach. I've seen this less applied in recent years, but I think it's still valid, and sometimes it helps to think about it. The capability approach assumes that there are certain resources in contexts. So our worlds are providing certain resources to children, to young people, to everybody, and a personal utilization function then actually has to apply these resources to create your own capability set. So it's pretty much an incorporation of the resources that you find outside, incorporate and develop your own capability set. It's pretty much a co-constructive assumption of a broader set of outcomes, your capability. The capability set then, well, goes into the functions that you're achieving over your lifetime. And this then can be applied to or be used of to the utility that for your everyday life outcomes. Subjective well-being is one of them, and it's one of the most discussed in the context of the capability approach. That's why I use this approach. So you really have a lot of different psychological, educational, and sociological theories that are actually incorporated and linked to the capability approach here. What's more important even is that in a corona crisis, most of them are affected. So the resources are affected. We have larger social disparities in the types of resources that students can apply in their everyday work. I think there's not a single country in the world where there aren't large differences between the better off and the less well off students in terms of how many digital appliances they have at home, how they can use them, how they can make use of them to follow their schooling. Second of all, the personal utilization function, their digital skills are different as well as an independent as a dependency of resources. So very early on, you have these
Oops, I don't hear you. Is it just me?
Nothing there?
No, now it's good again.
Now it's good again. Okay,
yeah.
Whatever happened? So
I don't know, we missed like, I don't know, half a minute or not very much.
Well, I can sum it up. The corona crisis affects every single step in this function of the capability approach, which then if you combine it, for example, with the cumulative learning outcomes, if you're applying Heckman or Bonfenbrenner, it doesn't matter. Most of the lifetime development approaches pretty much tap on the fact that we probably will see the larger impacts of this corona crisis and the effect it had on students in schools in a year, in 5 years, and even worse in 10 or 20 years. So I think particularly your study is very valuable at the moment. And even more important is to go into the field, as I learned that you have been there and you have been struggling. So saying something about challenges and potentials, I'm not sure if I can contribute much about field work with teenagers in schools in times of corona. You all know this. I mean, every sentence, part of the sentence that you're adding makes the problem worse. There are enough struggles. But let's just point out some valuable contributions that you're making, because I think that's something that I can, from the outside, I can contribute to this discussion. One of the most important or most valuable facts are actually that you're going or you're approaching this study with an ex-ante harmonization approach. So you're looking at the same students in a similar design with the same instruments, with the same constructs that you're measuring, because any kind of ex-post harmonization is always a huge loss of information. So what you're doing with this upfront approach is pretty valuable, and I think it needs to be emphasized when someone is discussing your work. Another effect that you're having on the field is to further establish international comparison studies. It's still unusual. I mean, I'm coming from Germany. German schools are not very prone to being compared. So just having another study showing them that it's valuable to contribute, it's valuable to participate, and it doesn't really hurt, but they can learn from it, is valuable in itself too. And I think it needs to be pointed out. Some ethical considerations that I had, I'm sure you're thinking about it, but I know that it's particularly challenging at the moment. The issue of informed consent. There has been a lot of discussion going on, which is only known to people that are actually doing the field work. It's so easy to say, well, you need informed consent. But what does it mean, particularly in context of youth? There are some cultures that say, well, a 15-year-old can consent him or herself. Others say, well, only parents can. In a third country, you probably have your ethic committee saying, well, you need both consent in written confirmation. So I'm sure that's one of the challenges. I'm very much looking forward to learn how you've been doing this. Privacy and data security issues, not much to say about that. What I'd be happy to learn is whether and how you are going ahead with the metadata access and open science issues. One of the big issues, true, but one again where I think your study can make a very valuable contribution to the research field. And lastly, I decided that perhaps to give you a little push, what I learned from the studies that I've been involved in, which is the NEPS, the PISA, the AIDA study, the KIPS, and the ERIC study at the DJI, my own institute. Think about enriching your data. There are so many possibilities for either data linkage with individual data on a country level, like your standardized achievement tests that you might have in a country, or your workforce data that you have for the parents that could be linked with that. Think about data linkage and try to get involved in the data sets that are out there and might help you. And the other is really adding regional and administrative data. At the DJI, this is like the short emphasis of my own institution. We have a data bank on regional data that really links administrative information from unemployment rate to share of children in childcare on a community level. Think about this type of data. It's available in every single country, not always on a community level, but it might help you find additional stratifications, additional social inequalities that you have in your country. If you just think about, how the regional distribution across, either a community, a state, or even in the federal structure like Germany might develop differently. So thank you very much. I hope there were some thoughts that might inspire the later discussion, and I'm very much looking forward to learn more about your work.
Thank you so much, Susanne. Yes, there's many points that was happy to hear about the benefits, and also about suggestions how we could enrich our research, and with the enrichment strategies. Yeah, we will definitely consider how to contribute also to more research, and how to connect, and how to learn more about our population. If there is, I did not explain the format of the webinar, so if there is like short questions of understanding, you can ask them now, or short, smaller comments. No, okay. Then the idea is that we go to the next presentation after presentation, and I will always give a short introduction of the speaker, and then we will have, I think, 25 minutes or so for the discussion, for answers and discussions, and the speakers will be all here. So please stay here if you have a question, longer question for Susanne. Thank you again. Giovanna Mascaroni is our next speaker. She is the Italian, representing the Italian partner of the ySKILLS project. She is from the University Cattolica del Sacro Cuore di Milano. And she is associate professor in sociology in digital media. And she's also in the project, the very important person, work package leader 6. And today she will talk about the recruitment and of schools and problems with it. It was quite a challenge for many of us, and experiences with collaboration. Giovanna, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Natalia, and thank you also, Susanne, for giving us a general framework to our own challenges and problems, especially when you mentioned the PISA test. This is actually an opportunity for us to compare, to have a comparison with our own data. But it was also a challenge itself, because PISA, at least as Italy is concerned, happens in the month of April, when we were expected to do data collection in schools. So schools were not much eager to participate in the ySKILLS project, also because of overlap with other research like the PISA, for example. But let me start, sorry, I went too fast, with the recruitment of schools. So as you can see from the table here, the situation has been challenging everywhere, probably a little bit more in some countries than others. Most of the countries had to contact a higher number of schools than those that eventually agreed to participate in the study. In many countries also, we have not received any kind of response from schools, from our emails and repeated attempts to get in touch with the school principal or teachers in the school. In Italy, for example, we were too optimistic in spring when we contacted 6 schools. Well, we contacted more, but we eventually had 6 schools, but they were not enough to reach our number of respondents, the number of respondents we aimed at. And so we started a second phase of recruiting, and so we have now 8 schools, and 2 schools will participate from the second wave. Not to mention also that some schools which initially agreed to participate then declined their participation due to unforeseen events like new restrictions due to COVID, and so going back to remote learning activities, which posed a number of challenges into the schools themselves. We try to, even if we are not relying on a nationally representative sample, we tried to create a balanced sample, especially in terms of region and SES. So we combined different criteria in order to meet the SES overall criteria. For example, a combination of the area where the school is located. So we involved schools, we tried to involve schools in more deprived versus more advantaged areas. And we also distinguished between different type of schools. So, for example, the situation between Germany and Italy was very similar in this respect. We included both more lower level of education, which would be the Mittelschule. I'm not sure if I pronounced it correctly in German, and vocational professional schools in Italy versus the gymnasium in both countries, or in other countries where the SES differences are not so pronounced, like in Finland. The recruitment was based mainly on the areas and the different cities involved. We also tried both in Estonia and in Italy to privilege full cycle schools in order to avoid too many dropouts in between one wave and the next for a change of school or shift from primary to secondary school or lower secondary to upper secondary schools. They have been successful in Estonia. My Estonian colleague Veronika Kalmus will tell you more probably later. It's been less successful in Italy because one of the full cycle schools never replied. The other one is a religious school, so they prefer to administer the survey only to older children and not those still in lower secondary schools, so those aged 12 and 13. We were pretty much helped in our recruitment process when we had prior collaborations with schools or prior contacts with either the school principal or some teachers. So this is what most countries relied on. The data collection itself, so the number of respondents we managed to achieve varied a lot across countries. In general, we can say that everywhere, in order to reach the minimum of 1,000 respondents, we had to involve many more classes and many more schools than initially expected. We had some additional problems which are observable here, very visible here in relation to Finland and Italy regarding parental consent, but Veronika Kalmus will tell you more about it. And in some countries, again, Finland, Italy and Poland, we had to postpone data collection to autumn. When we didn't have any PISA tests, we were not closer to summer holidays, but more problems. We had to face more problems related to starting a new academic year, and so very busy. The schools were very busy nonetheless. And so the challenge is very quickly, because my time is almost over. It's been mainly due to schools already overwhelmed by research proposals, COVID-19, and also resistance from some teachers of the class we aim to interviews. It was particularly challenged when the school principal think that no pre-organization of data collection was needed. So we had to organize everything on the spot. And the preparation of a list of students with their nicknames for the network data collection was also difficult. We had to promise school, this is not a major burden on our side, it's an opportunity for us, but we managed to persuade the school by promising to deliver a presentation of the findings, but also to engage in teachers training, and also to provide data that can complement or supplement other existing data sources. So thank you. I will stop sharing my screen.
Thank you very much, Giovanna. Thank you for giving an insight in and an overview, also interesting for us by comparing the countries and their efforts in recruiting participating schools. Do you have anybody in the audience an immediate question for Giovanna and her presentation, regarding her presentation? Good. We will have, as I said, later time for questions also for Giovanna. Okay, then I'm happy to introduce the next speaker, Veronika. Veronika Kalmus from Estonia. She is from the University of Tartu, and where she is professor in sociology. And she is also important person, of course, in the ySKILLS project. She is leading a task in work package 3, and she will talk about parental consent versus children's rights. So yeah, opening a discussion on how to deal with the informed consent. Please go ahead, Veronika.
Thank you, Natalia, for this introduction. And indeed, I'll focus on the emerging issue of parental consent versus children's rights in social research. This talk is based on and is inspired by our experience of conducting the first wave of ySKILLS survey in 6 countries. In the ySKILLS project, we first planned to obtain parents' active informed consent in relevant age groups and students' informed consent in all 6 survey countries. And the clearance from the Social and Societal Ethics Committee of KU Leuven was obtained for the whole project and for the longitudinal survey. And the board of that ethics committee states that, as a general principle, they discourage passive informed consent procedures, especially in case of minors. This statement, however, does not exclude passive consent procedures under certain circumstances. And of course, national regulatory contexts need to be considered in our international project. So, what was the research practice in ySKILLS amid the COVID pandemic? In 3 countries, parental consent had to be asked in all grades. In 3 other countries, the oldest students, that is the 9th graders, could consent just by themselves. Nevertheless, in Estonia and Finland, parental consent was asked in all grades, just to streamline research and to simplify the procedure for schools. Then, according to national or school regulations, active parental consent was required in 5 countries. In Estonia, the mode of obtaining parental consent is not explicitly stated in regulations, and practices vary. Then in ySKILLS research practice, all country teams started with asking active parental consent via different, mostly online channels. As Estonian schools were on the distance learning mode at that time, we could reach parents only via online platforms. We realized quite quickly that parents were just too exhausted and indifferent to consent actively online. And then we decided to follow the suggestion given by some schools to switch to passive consent. According to our contact persons, this was a usual practice in Estonian schools, whereas obtaining active consent from most parents had always been very difficult. Other countries stick to active consent, also because this was required by schools in those countries. In total, all these practices resulted in remarkable problems. In most countries, extremely many parents did not give their consent. In some school classes, they declined collectively. And this led to the need to recruit new schools, which in 2 countries resulted in partial postponement of fieldwork, as Joanna already mentioned. Obviously, problems with obtaining active parental consent have direct implications for the project. Probably there are some systematic sampling biases resulting from non-random selection of students into the study. Also, variation in parental consent collection methods and rejection rates between the countries needs to be analyzed and considered in the interpretation of findings. In the context of the open access data policy, this means that in order to avoid additional problems in interpretation, any secondary analysis of the data collected under such complex and nationally varying circumstances cannot be encouraged without proper awareness and consideration of all contextual factors. And there's a practical lesson we learned. Do not ask for parental consent if it's not required. For instance, don't ask it for students above the age of consent. Our experiences have also some wider political implications. Firstly, we should keep in mind that participation in social surveys is more than just being a data subject. It is also a way for expressing one's opinions and preferences, voice and agency. Therefore, the requirement of active parental consent may conflict with children's civic rights, tending to discriminate more vulnerable children. Furthermore, the requirement of active parental consent may result in biased samples and unreliable research findings, which in turn lead to inadequate policy recommendations that again are more likely to be inconsiderate of the concerns and needs of more vulnerable groups. And we should reckon that the conflict between parental consent and children's rights is becoming more acute and sharp in the post-truth and post-pandemic society, where the authority of state institutions and science is diminishing among certain groups. Thus, we can no longer assume that all parents are always fully informed and serve as the most competent counselors and unbiased gatekeepers for their children. And therefore, considering the transforming information environment, the stakeholders in social research should revisit the ethical requirements concerning parental consent. And some points to consider in those deliberations. A more flexible and context-sensitive approach is needed to enable weighing the pros and cons of parental consent against the aims, focus, and methods of each particular study. And in school-based social research, it may be really sufficient to rely on just one gatekeeper, for instance, the school, and of course, children's own informed consent. And to reduce potential sample biases, it's important to enhance information and data literacy among all relevant stakeholders, and especially children and parents. And to conclude, this famous saying that's attributed to Mahatma Gandhi can be interpreted in several ways. But in the context of research ethics, it means that any positive change begins within the very research community. So we have to take the issue of parental consent versus children's rights very seriously and start searching for ethical and feasible solutions to this problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. I think we this is a lot of stuff for a discussion later. But do you have anybody in the audience an immediate question or comments? I'll give you a few more seconds. But we're good, by the way, we're doing good time-wise. Not bad, just a few minutes. But we're running late. Okay. So no questions, which I take the opportunity and continue with the introduction of the next speaker. It's my colleague Christine Pöttcher from the Ludwig Maximilian University in Munich, Germany. And she works closely with me on in work package 4, and she was leading the big task in Germany of data collection in Munich and the surroundings of Munich. And today she will give, didn't say so, she is a researcher at the Department of Educational Studies, and she is also a PhD candidate and working with on the ySKILLS project and using ySKILLS data. And today she will talk about challenges in data collecting, specific challenges when collecting data online and in distance education. Tini, please go ahead.
Thank you, Natalia, for the opportunity to report on our experience here. Shortly before the start of the first wave of ySKILLS in spring 21, we were faced with an uncertain situation. Many schools in which our survey was to take place were closed due to the corona pandemic. And at first we thought we would simply carry out the survey online, no problem. But in fact, we have encountered some challenges, which I would like to briefly tell you about in this short presentation. For your orientation, here you can see an overview of the number of units in which the survey was carried out completely online or in hybrid form. That means with some students at home and some students at school. And during the first wave, we had to switch between these variants relatively spontaneously, depending on the infection. I now would like to address the challenges that emerged from fully online surveys. That means either class teacher and researcher together in school and the students at home, or second scenario, everyone at home. And I tried to categorize our challenges into technical, organizational, and ethical problems that arose from the online survey situation. We faced a number of technical problems that had already begun with the access to the online meeting. After many weeks of homeschooling, the schools were already equipped with video conference software, for example, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, Google Meet, but at some schools, external persons, including us as researchers, could not be given their own account. So this led to the fact that sometimes the researcher would meet the teacher at school and take place in the meeting from there. At other schools, on the other hand, no external persons were allowed to enter the school building. And Google Classrooms, for example, only allows meetings generated within the school system. So in these cases, we had to rely on the school or on the teachers to set up meetings for us and give us access to their class meetings. All in all, this created issues with expired meetings, not working links, students who were confused about which meeting they had to go in order to take part in our survey. Then we found out that a relatively large number of students don't have a computer or laptop at home, but do all their homeschooling on their smartphone. And in general, our questionnaire can be answered without any problems on a smartphone, but it contains a lot of text to read, which is certainly more tiring on a smartphone than on a large screen. But even for those who had worked on laptops, computers, or tablets, there can always be technical problems with the devices at home. And the difficulty is that, unlike in the classroom, we cannot help in this situation in the online meeting. Especially with students using their smartphones, we had the problem that some of them were given a time limit by their parents with regard to internet use. And it sometimes happened that the internet time simply was over for that day. So either they had to get another device and restart the survey, or the parents had to suspend time limit. But in both cases, some students lost motivation, and then the data was lost for us. And our questionnaire is temporarily saved in the browser when it is filled out. And that means after internet connection is lost, the survey can be continued at the same point by refreshing the browser or calling up the link again. But students didn't always manage it to restore the questionnaire in this way. And here we too had the problem that we couldn't help in this situation without disturbing the others in the meeting. Let's leave technical problems behind and come to some points that made organizational difficulties in the online setting. The first challenge is that, unlike in the classroom, the researcher online has no idea who's actually busy filling out the questionnaire or who is doing something completely different, especially when the cameras are off, which was almost always the case. And another problem that already played a role in technical problems is that the online setting disrupts communication. What do I mean with that? In the classroom, you can quietly clarify individual question with the student. But in the online meeting, everyone hears everything. And this means that if there are a lot of questions from the students, you have constant restlessness during the meeting and maybe disturb the others who are reading the questionnaire and trying to concentrate. The other way around, it can happen that students in the online meeting do not dare to ask anything in front of everyone, especially the younger students, 12 or 13 years old, are sometimes really very shy. And so, misunderstandings cannot be eliminated. Questions maybe remain unanswered, and this can lead to errors, for example, when creating the personal ID at the beginning of the questionnaire. And another problem was that students were sometimes late for online classes. And if students arrive a few minutes late, the researcher has to decide what to do now, either wait until everyone is there, which can lead to the fact that the class is not enough to fill out the questionnaire. And this is problematic for the researcher if the next survey takes place immediately afterwards. And of course, for the students too, who have to go to the next class afterwards too. So maybe the researcher starts the introduction from the beginning, or the researcher ends the introduction for the others first and then instruct the late students again. But all of this is not ideal in online setting. And the last point on this slide is related to this. There were always students who took a very long time to fill out the questionnaire. For example, due to language problems or due to reading skills. And in the classroom, you can just let these students sit while the next group arrives. But in the online meeting, this is not possible. So you have to hope that the person will complete the questionnaire after the meeting or later in the day. But we all know that this is relatively unlikely. Let me now turn to ethical problems that we were not so aware of beforehand. Here we have especially challenges in guaranteeing the anonymity of the students and in protecting the students' data. It happened that in some cases, the parents suddenly stood next to the child and watched while completing the survey out of curiosity or because they had to help with the operation of the computer or something. And this is, of course, a problem for anonymity, and it may influence the students' response behavior, of course. And in times of homeschooling, sometimes the siblings or the whole family were at home, sometimes in the same room. So you never know exactly who will take a look at the questionnaire or at the students' answers. And in addition, the interim storage of the questionnaire saves the child's answers in the browser. And these answers can be restored as long as the questionnaire has not been completed and sent off. So if a child decides to cancel the survey, the browser history must be erased so that the answers are really gone. And this is also difficult to explain in an online meeting. And we can check and ensure this in person in the classroom, but not online. So a brief conclusion, online format was more complicated than we initially thought. And it was much more complex. It took a lot more time and more stuff than we expected and than we planned. And apart from the problems mentioned, our impression is that students in the online meeting are less concentrated than in-class students. Furthermore, Estonia found that types of data collection had an influence on the completion rate and on the average time of completing the survey, and therefore may also have impact of findings. In Estonia, the participation rate was the highest in the in-classroom sessions with 19.2%, and the lowest for fully online sessions. And data in Estonia also show that in the fully online mode, the average completion time was about 10 minutes higher than in the classroom mode. Nevertheless, in the first wave of ySKILLS, we managed to collect data from more than 6,000 students in 6 countries. And our lessons learned for the next survey is that pre-testing should not only be carried out face-to-face, but also in an online setting. And for the next wave, we definitely have to plan more time per data collection and more time buffers between the units when the survey takes place online again. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Tini, for the presentation on the online specific challenges, which were, as you said, quite unexpected. Initially, we were like, oh yeah, we can do it online. Actually, that's good. It might be easier, but no, it wasn't. Wrong thinking. Now I want to introduce, is there any immediate question to Christine's presentation? Very quick comments. Well, we're coming to the question and answers session anyways. Rasmus will be moderating the question and answers, and he is also a member of the ySKILLS teams. He's part of the Finnish team. He's postdoctoral researcher at the University of Helsinki, and he will be, so I can lean back and he will moderate this discussion. Rasmus, welcome also, and thanks for taking over this task.
Okay, thank you so much, Natalia. And thank you to all the speakers, of course, here, and especially Susanne as an outsider, so to speak, outside the project. Listening to all of these, your presentations, and of course reflecting on the first wave, I must say that it's a slight irony that we're studying digital skills and access to digital devices, and then we face all these technical problems and issues with consent and data anonymity, and it's sort of something that we have to grapple with at the same time as we're studying it among adolescents. But reflecting on the issues, I was thinking first, since we don't have any questions from the audience, I was thinking about well, of course, everything seemed well. I think we were quite optimistic in the spring, although we knew about the pandemic and the situation, and then it turned out a bit worse than expected. Related to Giovanna's presentation and the recruitment, what's your thoughts on any incentives we could have in data collection. Of course, now in Horizon 2020, no incentives are allowed. But since we had such big difficulties recruiting schools, or at least in most countries, what if there wouldn't be any restrictions, what would these incentives be? And would it be only for students? Would parents be included somehow? What would the rewards to the schools be then? What's your thoughts on this? Do you want to, Susanne, start? Do you have your comment on this? Yes.
Okay.
If you want me to start, I have some ideas. The issue of incentives is a sad story. Nevertheless, we need to think about it because there's hardly any social research, at least in Germany, done without any incentives anymore. On the one side, and the others are obligatory surveys, national standard assessments. I mean, that's obligatory. Schools have to participate, students have to participate. There's no question about it. But anything that's voluntary, you need incentives. In a completely unrelated research, we are doing some corona monitoring on early child care settings. And we found a very neat incentive. We have weekly assessments of cases in child care settings all across Germany. And we set up a dashboard. And we post every single week, we post our results on a dashboard. So the main return that we found is actually that, I think, Veronica, you mentioned that earlier, settings actually found that they have a voice, that they are heard, that their problems are seen, that there's a possibility to, create awareness for their situation. And I think that's kind of incentive that's even possible within the Horizon 2020 because it doesn't cost that much. I mean, it's work on our side. We have to update it and everything, but posting the results, creating transparency about what we are doing, what's the immediate return to practitioners, that's always an incentive that you can think about. And I think as a research group, we need to be much more creative on which kind of information this could be. A short video clip about your results. If every one of you just, I think possibly this webinar is an incentive. It would be if it would be open. But for people to see that everything that they contribute to research is worthwhile is an important incentive.
Okay, thank you, Susanne. Good point. I didn't see Natalia or Giovanna who was first. Maybe Natalia could go first then.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks, Susanne. This is a valuable insight, really, because I was thinking maybe for wave 2 and 3, like especially for those who are changing school and which we need to track individually, it would be really helpful if we could use incentives. Maybe we can argue within the project with a, I don't know, responsible project officer that to apply incentive, to use incentives in such cases at least. But yeah, but this is rethinking other forms. Maybe it's not, I don't know, it could be something not money related or something that's not like really incentives in the close meaning, but like other kind of motivation. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Natalia, and then Giovanna.
Yeah, thank you, Rasmus. So I'm not really sure that incentives would solve the problems, at least in Italy. So I think that in terms of collaboration with schools and teachers, teachers training is already a powerful incentive. So as in the case of Italy, for example, the National Plan for Digital Education included that digital citizenship education is now part of the curriculum, but most of the teachers don't know how to and what practically to teach. So to promise help on these topics already worked well. I think the major problem we had is actually with parents and how the research was communicated with parents and how parents and societies in general are oriented towards research right now. I'm telling this because I'm also conducting another project at the moment, which is a smaller scale project, a qualitative project. And there we are engaging families with young children for 3 waves of qualitative interviews in their home settings. We have incentives. It's overall, it will be 100 euros in that they can spend on Amazon, and still we are struggling to reach some, especially some less educated and less on a lower income families. So I think it has to do with the role of science and research in societies right now. And again, I think the COVID pandemic added more complexities on top of an already difficult relationship between research and society. So I think it's a matter of trust. And see also with the vaccination rate, which is fluctuating in some countries. I think this is a major problem that we are facing. And I'm not sure that incentives alone will actually help us deal with this problem.
Thank you, Giovanna. That was one of my thoughts behind this question, was exactly that. For instance, in Finland, we offered, as an incentive, we offered to the school a very sort of a package of the results which they got related to certain questions. So the teachers got immediately the feedback, and that was like an incentive for the schools and for the teachers. But then, kind of how to get the parents on board and how to get the pupils was then a much bigger issue. Any of you still want to comment on this, or should we move on to another question? Then relating to Veronica's presentation, the issue of consent, what's your views on consent, the future of consent, if you can say so? Since Veronica's her ending on the PowerPoint was that no more consents should be asked. So what's your views on the issue? Okay. That's okay. Suzanne, please go ahead.
Veronica, do you want to go first? I think you raised your hand before.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Veronica, please.
Yes, thank you. Well, I wanted to comment on the previous question as well, but I can do it really shortly and in connection to the consent question. Well, I think that it's also important to involve schools as partners in our projects, as official partners. They are not in this project. They could have a small budget and they could have more say and more responsibility. And in fact, I never said that no consents needed. It wasn't on my slides, and I didn't say or won't say this, but we have to think about this issue, and we have to be more flexible and find new ways. And one thing I proposed is substituting gatekeepers. And I'm saying that in the educational settings, schools or the educational authority or the teachers could take the role of this gatekeeper. It should be enough. And in that case, we can solve this issue at least partly. And if we compare this to another very hot issue, which is testing and vaccination, in that case also other adults, be it GPs or nurses, can take the role of the gatekeeper or counselor if, for instance, the child wants to get vaccinated, but the parent doesn't allow. And well, I think as social researchers, we should learn from those dilemmas. And this is one way to respect children's rights, while at the same time making sure that there are counselors and responsible adults around.
Thank you, Veronica. And Susanne, then please.
I'm a little more pessimistic, unfortunately. There are so many surveys I'm running. And in Germany, for example, if you want to substitute one of the gatekeepers for the other, so it grants the right to grant consent to schools instead of parents would not be possible because of federal law in Germany. It's I think it's paragraph 6 in our constitution that parents go first. Their decision goes first, and any kind of educational setting, institution, whatever comes second or perhaps even third. So it's not possible to substitute. And there's an additional problem rising in Germany. We have about a share of, well, I think it's 20% for the 3 to 6 year olds. 20% of children grow up in single parent households. And there is a rise of concern to which degree both parents have to grant their consent for these children to participate in a survey, which is really a lot of fun for field work because most of the times these parents are in great conflict. So, you know, if you're in trouble with your previous or former partner and who's father or mother of your child, and you know, some of them are lawyers. So we are very, very hesitant at the moment to conduct any kind of surveys with single parents because we might actually, well, raise more concern for more conflicts or more ground for more conflicts if the mother grants consent and then later on the father learns about it and complains that this was never intended and it's harmful for the children. It's not that bad if it's only a survey, but assessments are problematic already. And testing, for example, vaccinations, I mean, they're all amongst them. Even just a saliva collection could be problematic if you're dealing with these kinds of families. So families in difficult situations, and it's not only the divorced and the single parents, but in any kind of difficult situations are becoming more and more difficult to get access to. You're not the only one that's experiencing this kind of problem. It's a greater concern, and I think the overall decline rate that you've been observing in schools from the parent side is one that's really an international phenomenon. I think there should be greater, there must be a greater, I don't know, all-around research initiative to raise awareness, to probably raise trust. I think that the word trust was used before in the kind of research that they're doing, that it's helpful, that we're developing their schools further, that we're helping their situations, we're informing policymakers, but that's really a greater initiative that needs to be started.
Okay, thanks, Susanne. Natalia, did you have something to comment? Okay. Yeah, this was very kind of pertinent question for us in Finland, since we get the smallest sample and we had the biggest issues with getting the consents, and 62%, I don't remember whose slide it was here, was shown that 62% declined either passive or actively. So it's something, and it's a longer trend in Finland. We also see, and in the research projects we've been conducting. Then another related issue here, which I think Veronica also brought up, was exactly on the really carefully evaluating the contextual factors. Even though we are the primary researchers here, how do you think, if we have several different consent practices in different countries. How I mean, we don't know how biased our samples are. How do you think? Do you see it as an issue when, for instance, publishing articles on our results? Anyone? Veronica, please.
Well, it can be a problem, of course, but we have to acknowledge this and be honest about our limitations. To some extent, I guess we can estimate this possible bias by statistical means and procedures to know how big this can be. But yes, we will have to live with that. And anyway, it's better to have this data, at least some data, than no data at all. And still, our samples are quite big, at least for the first wave. So partly this can help us. But indeed, this is also valuable methodological experience that we all had. And we can probably make some methodological insights and contributions in the field.
Thank you, Veronica. And Susanne?
Again, that's why I included my idea of data linkage and regional or other administrative data. I think it would be a very valuable endeavor for the team to do some, well, selection analysis, to really just be transparent about the bias, have a technical paper that you can always refer to, published. It doesn't matter how, it's just as long as it's available online and you can read it and get at it. And once you know about the bias and in which direction it goes and whether it's the same bias or a different bias in every single country, you can always go and try to erase at least part of it with a kind of weighing with your administrative data. I mean, you all have national data about the type of families and children that you have in your country. So post-stratification or weighing would be a possible way to erase the biggest issues perhaps, and then see whether your results will differ greatly from the original data. The other issue that I want to raise is the biggest problem that bias causes is for your point estimates. So you might want to consider to not report raw descriptive univariate analysis results. But if you have a strong theoretical model, it's always possible to do, well, at least bivariate or multivariate analysis. And as long as you control a lot of your bias in your multivariate analysis and have a strong theoretical background, it's always valid to use your data to a great extent. Be transparent about it, try to do as much as possible in your modeling expertise and your weighing expertise, but as Veronica already said, having that kind of data as a starting point for longitudinal research is definitely worthwhile continuing it.
Okay, thank you so much, Susanne. Natalia, how much time do we have?
I was so into the discussion that I forgot that I have to check the time. We got 2 more minutes.
Well, maybe just one issue that was raised earlier was that, of course, that we didn't have maybe enough resources for data collection in schools regarding the pandemic, regarding the whole situation, distance learning and so on. What do you think could be done, like concretely in schools to, for instance, if we think especially at the low SES schools, to engage, get students and parents committed? What could be done if we would have more resources? What could concretely be done in those schools? You have any ideas or thoughts on? Okay, Natalia.
I was just thinking, if we had more resources, maybe if we had to do online data collection, we could have 2 researchers, and one could, those students who are coming late or those who have many questions, or the question could be dealt with in breakout rooms. But this cannot be done if there's just one researcher there, because she really needs to be available for everyone and all the time. So yeah, this is what comes up to my mind, and I think it's a problem in general that in this project the researchers are collecting data, that we're collecting data ourselves, because it's really time consuming, and yeah, I think many of us wish we could have so much time for doing analysis and writing up results, and not just spending time in school and dealing with principals and so on.
And then there's, of course, the more structural issue that one core thing was mentioned, was the trust. And if there's more kind of distrust in lower SES schools and among parents and pupils, how to get around how to improve maybe or increase the trust in research. Then any quick short comments on this yet? Maybe not. I think we're running out of time. Thank you so much. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, of course, if the researchers are carrying out data collection, if we're doing this ourselves, I think through a lot of personal contacts were also used for recruiting schools, and so in several countries. So I think, of course, this also helps for recruiting schools and for working to have good collaborations. But yeah, the downside is the resources needed. But for trust, of course, it's a good thing.
Okay, well, thank you so much to all the panelists, and I think we got many very good points raised here, and even maybe some solutions, at least something to consider in the second wave.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you very much for all participants, to the speakers, especially to our external experts, Susanne Kruger. And I think at least for me, I can say I got some new ideas, and I think we'll powerful go to the second wave. I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much to everyone, and I see you around.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Good luck with the study. I'll keep watching.
Yeah, please do. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.